know, Jack and Eliot, I've given made both of you co-hosts. So if you want to share your screen to show anything, you should be able to do that. Jack.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to see you all. And we were just talking before that next year will be the 20th anniversary of doing these, which is just kind of blows my mind. Not to mention the fact that you all look exactly the same, those of you who were here 20 years ago. So congratulations on lives well lived, I guess. But just for persistence to it, it's interesting to think back about these ecosystem partnerships having their roots back in the days when the Department of Natural Resources was able to facilitate and support these partnerships. And unfortunately, that capacity is long gone in most parts of the states, and most of the partnerships that I'm aware of also are not regularly meeting or doing things together. So the fact that you all have kept going entirely on your own support and cooperation is really not only with what's happened with the state's ability to support the partnerships, but even in this health environment is to a credit that the work you're doing and the bonds you all have made with each other. So it's always great to come back every year. Really grateful for the invitation. I am here with Eliot Clay today from IEC. I'll introduce him in just a second. I think he's got a lot of interesting updates on particularly conservation and water quality things that are on the agenda in Springfield, and some updates, I think, on some of those agency budgets as well. I thought I would just start with a few words about what the Sierra Club is going to be focusing on this spring. We take positions on all kinds of issues: pollution, conservation, energy issues. And each year we try to distill that to a short list of priorities that is one of the main purposes of which is to inform our volunteers who meet with their lawmakers in districts each year. So those meetings are just starting to happen because the legislature is off to a bit of an earlier start. They have ambitious goals about being done early this year and ending in early April. We'll see if that turns out to be true, but that is driving a lot of things like committee deadlines, and votes soon on the chamber floors will be happening a few weeks earlier. So our folks are already out there trying to have meetings with folks in district, with their legislators, representatives, and senators about these issues. And we just briefed all of our folks on these 4 priorities last week. So they should hopefully be in a position to be having those conversations already starting this week. I do have a few slides to share, and I wanted to say a few words. I was here last year, I think it was in April, I saw and talked a lot about the Clean Energy Jobs Act that we were working on in coalition on at the time. Obviously, we passed that last year. And so I just wanted to take a moment to celebrate that and thank any of you who played any role in that at all. And we know that this captivated people from across the state. And one of the main reasons we were able to pass what we think is the nation's leading climate and equity energy law is because we had such a groundswell of support. And never seen a proposal like this that has been welcomed by so many people across the state and worked on so hard for so long, come up against so many obstacles and delays and things that popped up over the 3 years that we were trying to pass it. But ultimately, in last September, we were able to pass legislation that gets fossil fuels entirely out of our electric supply, that gets us on the road to 100% clean energy, moving towards electric transportation, and really centers equity and environmental justice every step of the way. So just one slide on the major top lines here. It really is a comprehensive roadmap for the next 25 years for the state in terms of how we're going to act on climate change. And not only things like phasing out our carbon-based power, but also major economic development and workforce programs that should be benefiting our whole state, but especially the communities that need it most, that have been hardest hit by pollution, by racial injustice. And these are the folks that are going to be prioritized, not only for good jobs in the clean energy solutions we're going to need, but in the business opportunities that are going to be great opportunities, we hope, to build wealth in communities that need it most. So a lot to celebrate there. And I just, in case you are not, we are keeping going. If you're not in the loop with the Clean Jobs Coalition and you're curious about how we're going to get to all these goals, this is the place where we organize that work. And we are, the coalition, I'm very proud to report, is like growing even after this victory. People are joining now because they want to get involved in how we're going to reach these targets. We have a whole host of teams that are engaged in implementing this law, and that work is already underway, and we're going to be at it for the rest of this decade at least. So the work goes on despite the big win that we all had last year. So with that, what are we up to this year? Well, we don't have anything, a big generational type push on our agenda for this year, but there are some important things that we are already working on. I'm going to mention 4 of them, and then I'll turn it over to Eliot, who I think has got a lot of other interesting stuff to talk about. At the Sierra Club, we're focused on a fundamental upgrade to Illinois' environmental laws to better center environmental justice that's been prompted in part by some recent proposed new air pollution sources in neighborhoods that are already overburdened. Following up on our CJA victory, we're going to be taking a look at whether there should be statewide standards for demolishing these coal plants that are going to be closing. We are continuing to work on these PFAS chemicals known as forever chemicals. And we also have some important steps to take in making sure that we're getting electric vehicles into people's homes and businesses. The first bill that we're talking about is the environmental justice bill that is sponsored by Representative Sonia Harper and Senator Salinas Villanueva, both from Chicago. And these are addressing some flaws that community groups have experienced in our existing environmental laws with proposed new sources of air pollution that have come up during this respiratory health pandemic, particularly the General Iron situation in Chicago, where you have a industry that was polluting in a largely white north side neighborhood that essentially chose to leave to the southeast side of Chicago, a largely community of color. And that permit was granted by Illinois EPA, and so that they basically didn't have the tools to evaluate cumulative impacts. And IEPA also said that if the city of Chicago is going to allow or any local government is going to allow an air pollution source, then we really don't have, there's not much that we can do to deny it. We can try to make sure that it fits as best as possible. Oh, looks like I need to let a pet out of here. And so we're reacting to that particular situation with some fundamental upgrades that simply are about giving residents more power, giving their local governments more of a say in the process when the state considers large air pollution sources, and the way in which public hearings are done and information is disseminated so that it's available, accessible, and understandable by everyone. These are some of the details here. We're talking about things like a clear definition of what environmental justice means and what Illinois EPA needs to do to protect it, making sure that that information is available in the languages that are spoken in a community. And this key step where we have a local siting process before we get to a new air pollution permit decision by Illinois EPA, that the local government is empowered. This kind of mimics what we do with landfills and solid waste facilities now. And then some standards for how hearings would be conducted, and making sure that community residents have the standing to challenge actions by the state. Second, also an environmental justice issue we're working on is legislation around state standards for coal plant demolition. This was also sparked by local incidents in communities that happened, again, during this respiratory health pandemic. We had smokestacks come down with very little warning and inadequate safeguards in communities like Little Village in Chicago and Wood River in the Metro East in Illinois. And that has prompted an outcry for some minimum state standards, since the state both permitted these facilities to operate for decades and has now made the policy decision that they're all going to be closing in this decade. But we really don't want to leave communities on their own. with dealing with how these plants come down. These sites are owned by out-of-state companies, and we've seen the need for minimum state standards. And so we've got legislators from Chicago, from Peoria, and the Metro East looking at legislation to expand public notice so that people get adequate warning, and that there is public information disseminated so that people can learn exactly what's going to happen and how they might be able to protect their home and their property. And then that the owners of the facility would have to have an air quality plan that Illinois EPA would look at and approve before these smokestacks come down. So I think this is a really important part of the just transition away from a fossil fuel-based economy to a clean energy economy. That includes also looking after the workers that are impacted, making sure that the sites are cleaned up in terms of coal ash and other materials that might be on site, and that when the facility is actually demolished, that it's done as safely as possible. We are also this is an issue we worked on last year with PFAS chemicals. There's a lot of talk and a lot of concern about how prevalent PFAS are in our society, our consumer products, our water supply, and even in our bodies. And so that is driving good steps to phase them out of all kinds of products. For instance, in Illinois last year, we were able to phase them out of firefighting foams. That is leading to steps to dispose of them. And we're very concerned that incineration is not a way essentially to dispose of the chemical, but to change it from a solid or a liquid into air that can still get into the environment. And Illinois is home to one hazardous waste facility, incinerator facility in the Metro East that would be a candidate to burn this. It's in Sauget, Illinois, an already heavily burdened environmental justice community. And so we're supporting local community organizations there in trying to make sure that Illinois does not become the incineration site for these materials, for not only for our state, but for the country as they're phased out of different uses in our society. And then the fourth piece of legislation we're working on also is connected to climate and following up on CEJA. And this is the Electric Vehicle Charging Act. Deals with one of the key components of making sure that charging infrastructure is going to be ubiquitous in homes and in businesses. And it says that we are going to require that when we're building new construction for multifamily or commercial buildings, that there is going to be the conduit and other infrastructure put in at the time of construction. That's the cheapest time to do it. And it will be the easiest way for residents and for others using those facilities to be able to have access to charging infrastructure. The other thing it does is it clarifies for multi-unit dwellers, condo buildings, et cetera, what their rights and responsibilities are for being able to get charging into their parking facilities. Those are the bills, again, that we're going to be raising with legislators in our district visits this spring. But now I'm going to turn it over to Eliot, and then I'd be happy to come back for questions about the issues I just talked about. I know you're going to have a lot of interest in the conservation and water pollution issues that Eliot's going to be talking about. Eliot, if you don't know, is someone really important to know. Eliot's been working on agriculture, conservation, and other issues for IEC for years, but is in a new role as the legislative director. So he's the day-to-day person in Springfield managing the whole agenda and just a really great leader for all of us in our community. And he's got some critical updates on some of those other topics. So Eliot, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. I appreciate the intro, and it's good to meet all of you. I'm sure I've been on Zooms with a bunch of you before, and we've probably talked, but good to meet you again. Yeah, like Jack said, I'm kind of heading up our legislative agenda for the Illinois Environmental Council here in Springfield. For those of you who don't know, IEC is kind of served as sort of a clearinghouse for a lot of environmental organizations throughout Illinois, and really just try to do our best at representing the environmental community in the capital in Springfield. Prior to working for IEC, I actually worked on Senate Republican staff at the Capitol doing environmental and agriculture policy work, and transitioned over to the Environmental Council and did a lot of really just agriculture and water pollution related work, especially as it relates to like nutrient loss reduction and some things around that, which is one of the things I'll be talking about today. But I'm also super interested in just general conservation around like open space and water and, you know, wildlife and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'll run through a few bills. I don't have any slides really, but I'm happy to give you guys bill numbers and give you status updates on like where some of this stuff stands, and happy to answer questions about substantive parts of these bills. I will say, like Jack said, we've got a weird session this year. A handful of the pieces of legislation I'll talk about, I think we've come to the conclusion are not going to be moving this year just based on time constraints and the fact that we're also in an election year. So politicians are a little bit more hesitant about taking up stuff that might be controversial because they get scared about, you know, the impacts on the primary, which is going to be in June, and then there's the general election and all that stuff. So with that said, I wanted to highlight a few different bills that I think you all could be interested in, and could be an opportunity for you all to support too. The first one up is Senate Bill 3471. The name of this is the Partners for Nutrient Loss Reduction Act. Last year, IEC and our partners did a lot of advocacy in the state budget to get dedicated money really for the first time to combat nutrient pollution in the state. As you all are well aware, Illinois is 75% agriculture land in like some kind of working condition, like the actual land mass, which, you know, is great in terms of our economy for the state. I mean, obviously agriculture is a real pillar of our state's functioning, but at the same time, that has led to some really bad environmental issues, one of which has been nutrient pollution. The prevalence of nitrogen and phosphorus in our waterways has really led to detrimental impacts. I mean, you read every year about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and algae blooms that are appearing on rivers in Illinois and other parts of the country that are dangerous to wildlife and people, honestly. And that's really all a result of nutrient pollution. It creates little pockets of you know, low oxygen areas in water that allow algae and these kind of things to proliferate that can be dangerous to wildlife. And we're trying to figure out what we can do about it. And one of the things we wanted to do was try to get the state working towards achieving goals under the nutrient loss reduction strategy, which is something that we've been working on for a number of years. Unfortunately, every year that has come out, it has been pretty obvious that we are not only not making progress on those goals, but we are actually going backwards. We're about 20 to 30% higher nutrient loads than we were when we first started measuring. So we're literally going backwards on this. We're not making progress, and we're losing ground. So with that in mind, we advocated for funding last year, and there were some cool things that came out of it. Like we doubled the amount of money that's in the cover crop insurance discount program that the state has started to $600,000, which is really great. But that's just kind of a drop in the bucket, honestly, where we need to be going. So Senate Bill 3471, the Partners for Nutrient Loss Reduction Act, is really an attempt to align the processes between the Illinois Department of Agriculture and soil and water conservation districts in Illinois to come up with watershed specific plans for how the SWCDs will attempt to make measurable impacts on nutrient reduction, and provide some like new funding for like on the ground watershed scale conservation practices that really they have not had access to before. One of the things that we did see that was disappointing about the governor's proposed budget from last week is that it slashed SWCD funding in half, which is very unfortunate. We are currently in conversations with the governor's office about that, and it sounds like that is something I believe that they're going to be able to reverse their stance on that. It's still kind of early in the process, but budget advocacy is going to be something really big this year. And SB 3471, I think is going to be a good opportunity for kind of rallying the troops on not only funding for nutrient loss reduction, but also building in accountability for the state agencies and how the money is spent, and coming up with some really cool plans on how to really make some marked progress on that. In addition to that, there's a number of other open space related bills that we're really interested in. House Bill 5066 is around prescribed burn liability. One of the things that we keep hearing from conservation practitioners is that the ability to get insurance to do prescribed burns is very difficult because of the way liability law is set up in Illinois under current statute. This would basically give some cover to say that, you know, the conservation practitioners will not be held liable as long as they were following, you know, all the rules and regs that are set up, and that they weren't, you know, doing anything either malicious or just kind of off the wall in terms of what their responsibility is. Unfortunately, that bill is not going to be moving this year. We have to deal with the Trial Lawyers Association, which is a group that is not fun to deal with in Springfield, and they have a history of killing a lot of really, really good pieces of legislation. But having said that, we want to circle the troops around that going into next year too. And we really put it in this year just to get a conversation started. So we're excited at least to get this on people's radar. Another interesting bill that we're going to be doing, well, I guess we're not going to be doing the bill, but it's House Bill 5067. And this is going to really set up pesticide licensing that is specifically for conservation practitioners. Right now, in order to get a pesticide applicator license in Illinois, you have to go through this whole testing process that includes mostly things around industrial scale agriculture, which obviously for a conservation professional is not something they're really interested in, right? In terms of like aerial spraying and all these kind of things, it's not something that we really delve into. But if we want to have volunteers on the field that want to do like really pinpoint, you know, invasive species removal and those kind of things using neonics and other chemicals, but in a responsible way, we want to be able to have them get licensed, but in a manner that's more appropriate for what they're doing. So we put in this bill, but we've talked with the Department of Agriculture, and through their rulemaking process, we are going to work with them to create basically a conservation practitioner pesticide licensure, which would be really, really cool. We're excited to see how that's going to roll out, but we'll definitely keep folks posted on that. In terms of other open space related bills, one thing, and I'm sure this has been on all your radar, has been Bell Bolt Prairie up in the Rockford area. This was the natural area site that has obviously been a huge media kind of firestorm around the protection of this prairie that is one of very, very few in Illinois that is being proposed to be basically bulldozed over. While that is going on, we've acknowledged that doing anything through state statute on this right now is pretty difficult because of how far along in the process this whole thing has been. But if anything, it has highlighted that the notification processes that are used by DNR and the coordinating between them and the Department of Transportation and all these other groups with the siting and permitting of this new proposed facility on the site show that there's a real lack of real public facing and forward facing notifications about the DNR giving thumbs up or thumbs down to the expansion of these kind of facilities and being okay with disturbing natural areas. So one of the things that we're going to do is really work with the department and with our partners to figure out how do we enhance the notification process to make sure that if there is a proposed change to a site, the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory, that people are made aware of it much sooner than they were in this instance. From what I can tell, the department followed the rules in the sense that there was a posting in a local newspaper in Rockford saying that this was a site that was potentially going to be disturbed. But the way that the current rules are written now, it was buried in the newspaper and nobody even saw it. So we want to make sure this is much more, the DNR notifies a bunch of different people about what will be going on, and really just trying to strengthen that. A couple other bills that are kind of interesting that are, I think, related to open space. One, we put in a bill this year that bans the use of a chemical called dicamba, which I'm not sure how familiar folks are, but this is a herbicide that is very heavily involved in soybean production throughout the country now. And it is problematic for a number of reasons. The main one being that it's an extremely volatile herbicide that even if you spray it under perfect conditions, can pick up and move pretty readily to another site, even 2 or 3 days after it's been laid down. This has caused big issues in the agriculture industry just because this stuff can pick up and move onto adjacent fields and damage other neighbors' crops, which is obviously a problem. But from an open space perspective, it's been hugely problematic because dicamba is non-discriminatory in terms of what it affects, and it has been impacting natural areas a lot. We've seen repeatedly at DNR properties and land trust properties incidents of like leaf cupping and tree death among trees that are 100+ years old as a result of multiple dicamba exposures over the past few years. And the legal ramifications of this have led to lawsuits throughout the country at the state and federal level. And we understand that this bill will not be moving this year. It's House Bill 4363, by the way, is the number. But we wanted to start a conversation about this because we have heard anecdotally that the federal government may not renew the certification for this pesticide, meaning that it would not be available to be used or sold anymore as a result of anything that's going on. But the bottom line is people need to start talking about this and figuring out, you know, where do we go forward if dicamba is not allowed anymore? Because it's really proliferated throughout the soybean industry in Illinois, and they've got to get a good handle on where we're going to be on next steps on that. The last one I wanted to highlight was about the use of a pesticide group called neonics on state property. This is House Bill 4558. We're going to hit pause on it this year, but the idea behind this bill is having the state of Illinois be a leader in terms of the responsible use of neonics. These are a class of pesticide that are called systemic pesticides, meaning that they really target the like the motor I forget what the technical term for it is, but basically like the neurological system of like insects, regardless of what kind of insect it is, and is one of the chemicals that has really been linked towards colony collapse disorder in bee populations and a number of other bad things. But having said that, neonics can be useful, especially in the treatment of invasive species like emerald ash borer and a number of other ones if it's used responsibly. So what we wanted to try to do was set up basically a system in which the state of Illinois would be using this chemical more responsibly. We've hit a couple of snags with conversations with DNR on this, and we're hoping we're going to get that resolved for next year. Another big goal of this bill, at least my personal goal, is to make neonics a restricted use pesticide in Illinois, meaning that the only way that you would be able to purchase them and use them is if you're a licensed applicator. This would ultimately mean that you would not be able to buy neonics products at like Lowe's, for example. The nice thing is that a number of retailers have already committed to stop selling these products. So as time has gone on, this idea of making them restricted use has become less controversial. And I think next year could be a good time to finally get that enshrined in the law. So we're excited about that. the bottom line is there's a lot of different open space issues out there that I think 2023 is going to be a big year for pushing a lot of this stuff, especially with the Clean Energy Jobs Act being done. I think there's a lot of room to start organizing around some conservation initiatives, and especially around state funding for our agencies. The Governor Pritzker's proposed budget had increased staffing at DNR, the Department of Ag, and the Environmental Protection Agency, which we are very happy about. But the bottom line is, like Jack kind of said a while ago, the DNR is not where it was 20 years ago. And there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to build it back up to where it could be and be a really well-functioning agency doing, the things that we want it to be doing. So we're going to keep pushing on agency funding and these kind of things. So increasing money for these agencies, including soil and water conservation districts, and a number of other funding mechanisms that could be helpful for us. But yeah, that's kind of my big kind of spiel overview of all the stuff that we're working on. I'm happy to answer any questions or elaborate on anything, but happy to talk with folks.
So yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask them verbally, or you could type them in the chat and we'll try to watch for that. And they can be questions either for Eliot or Jack or both on the things that they've highlighted. A lot of really interesting things there that they've talked about that I think are of interest to us.
You guys have a House bill for the Partners for Nutrient Loss?
There is no House bill for that one. Our hope is actually going to be heard in committee tomorrow.
Okay.
And I was going to say, and I can drop a link in the chat if folks are interested in filing a witness slip for that bill. Definitely more than appreciated. And we're still trying to get co-sponsors for that bill as well. So if you know a local elected that would be interested in doing that, especially in the Senate right now, we would definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, that bill is so important for the nutrient loss reduction strategy and the super stations and getting that consistent funding that we need to keep implementing the program we've been working on for so long.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Good.
Elliot, do you want to say
Eliot?
something? Sorry, do you want to say something about virtual lobby day next Friday?
Oh yeah, man, I'm glad that you said that. My boss would be mad if I forgot.
Yeah, that's good.
So yes, next Friday, the 18th, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be our big virtual lobby day. And Jack really did a good job covering. We're still finalizing what our exact list of bills we're going to be lobbying for, but Jack basically covered them. So environmental justice permitting, the coal plant demolition bill, and a couple of other ones are going to be the ones that we're really going to be pushing with legislators. If anybody is interested in being involved with that lobby day, I will drop a link into the chat where you can register and help out with. I think really the big idea Friday is that we are going to be really contacting basically every legislator in the state about the bills that we think are priorities from the environmental community this year. So like I said, I'll put a link in the chat here in a second, but really appreciate your all help on that. And Holly, I think you may have had a question.
I think it was just a follow-up with the links. Also a link that you kind of have a summary or like a go-to page on the IEC website for various legislation.
Yeah,
I would follow.
Yeah, I was going to say, I will. Yeah, I'm happy to drop links for that. We've got our big legislative agenda thing on there, so I'll drop a link for that as well.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, we can put those links on the FREP webpage if that makes it easier for people to find them.
Yeah, that's great. Whatever I can do to be most helpful. That's awesome.
Yep. We're all working on it together. Lots going on. What I know it's sort of wrapped up in the Clean Energy Jobs Act that you got passed last year, but what can you tell us about the real status of the Prairie State coal-fired plant?
So
That
the
some of the suburbs right here in our watershed are tied to in contracts.
Right. So this was one of the most difficult issues to resolve, and that's one of the
Right.
reasons why it took. We went into like double or triple overtime to get the bill
Right.
done last year. And where we ended up was that Prairie State is going to be has. So the legislature broke all of our coal plants into two categories. They said that for privately owned coal plants, which are all but two, they all have to be gone by 2030. And then for municipally owned coal plants, which includes Prairie State and the facility owned by the city of Springfield, they are able to run until 2045, but they have to reduce their carbon emissions by half by 2035. And so that we don't know how Prairie State will choose to realize that goal, but it does sync nicely with the fact that a lot of the communities their contracts end in 2035. So it could very well be, when, and I know Naperville rolls off in 2035 is a big one. It's actually their largest customer is done in 2035. It may be that Prairie State will choose to retire, and Prairie State is comprised of 2 units, and they may choose to just retire one of them to get to the 50% reduction. They are talking potentially about looking at things like carbon capture and storage, but we haven't heard them be too bullish on how possible that is going to be. But that's basically where we ended up on that.
All right, thanks. Any other questions or comments from others? Lots of good stuff here, and I know if we were in person, there'd be a lot more talking going on.
That's just the way it goes with Zoom and all that
Yep.
fun stuff.
It is usually. Carolyn?
So Jeff, I was just gonna jump in terms of like what's happening at more of a local level. When Eliot, you were talking about dicamba and the neonics, the McHenry County Conservation District just within the last couple of months voted to restrict that use on our leased property. So it's no longer permitted on lands that we lease out to farmers in our area on district owned land. So a small start maybe at the local level.
No, I was going to say that's a great flag too. And one thing that we've been doing the last couple of years is working with the Department of Natural Resources on their leased agriculture. The Department of Natural Resources, believe it or not, leases out about 38,000 acres for agriculture in the state. And a lot of it is immediately adjacent to like really sensitive natural areas. One is just an example down here in Springfield area. Is Jim Edgar Panther Creek State Fish and Wildlife Area. That is a very, very big property that has a lot of really cool ecosystems in it, but it's also adjacent to a lot of farmland. And up until recently, the DNR did not have very good restrictions on what could and couldn't be done on some of those properties. But we've been working with them, and the DNR has been very proactive in building into their lease agreements basically things the person working the land would need to do, including they cannot use dicamba anymore, which is something that was allowed briefly at one point. So that's done. I think neonics are being phased out as well. And one cool thing that they're doing is doing baseline soil testing to try to get an idea of what the soil health status is of these properties and figure out ways to incorporate cover crops and things to really help with nutrient retention in the soil there. One kind of fun thing too, I was actually just talking with somebody about, part of the mission of DNR2 obviously is supporting habitat and those kind of things. And they've been able to do a couple of test plots where the cover crops that they're using during the wintering, during the winter months are actually doubling as habitat for like migratory bird populations. So it's actually getting like a dual effect where we're helping the soil health improve while also providing habitat for these migratory bird populations, which is a really, I think, just kind of a cool success story of like an intersection between like agriculture and open space and how those can work together in some ways, which is something we definitely want to keep promoting too. So definitely kudos to DNR for kind of making efforts on that. And that's really great that you're seeing that at the local level too. That's great.
Yeah, and I don't know, it doesn't look like there's anyone on the call from some of our other forest preserve districts that hopefully they're doing similar things. But one thing that did bring to mind that just as another little plug, the first speaker at after some introductory things, at our Fox River Summit will be another farmer that's engaged in regenerative agriculture. We're trying to continue with that theme at our summits as much as we can. And I don't know how Tom knows this guy, but he's a legit enough farmer that he asked us to be scheduled in the morning because he has to get home and tend his cattle in the afternoon. So it's a real-time farmer, but he's going to talk about how he's gone to cover crops and all that comes in the regenerative agriculture approach. And so that'll be the first major talk in the morning at the summit.
Besides for the governor's budget with some increased funding, have you heard how, especially the IEPA is going to start addressing the staffing needs that is coming because of the infrastructure budget? I mean, with SRP and so many of those programs getting mass amounts of money, they need to have staff to be able to get this stuff out. Are they even talking about it? Have you heard it?
Jack, do you have any updates on that from like the infrastructure standpoint?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a great question, Deanna, because I think this is something we all need to be paying probably more attention to, speaking for myself at least. And I do think we have time. I mean, the number of pools of money and the sizes of the pools of money are really quite staggering. And so
I mean,
I think it's going to take years actually to get that programmed. I think that IEPA, there are limits on sort of one-time infusions of capital infrastructure to how much you can spend on headcount for employees.
yeah, I mean, but the number for SRP, I mean, I've sat through a lot of federal workshops on this, and like SRP gets their normal amount of money, but now they're going to get almost $200 million extra from the infrastructure bill just in year one that needs to go through. That's just clean water. So that's not even the drinking water side of things. That's just the wastewater side that I work in.
Right.
And so we have to, I mean, I can't get permits or anything shaken loose down there on a good day. So,
yeah, it's really, and it's interesting because it's not, as I understand it, a budget problem. That IEPA for the last 2 years, I think, has had budget for increased headcount.
Yep.
They are having some real challenges with hiring, both based on the fact that Springfield is where they're doing most of their hiring, and also that with employment being difficult in the economy generally, attracting candidates at state salaries is a real challenge for them. I think that they're aware of it. I think that they're trying some things that they haven't tried before in terms of recruiting and HR practices, but I think you can only hire people that apply.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, you guys work in the water sector. I mean, like Greg's gone, every day, every week, it's a new person that we work with on a daily basis is gone, and there's no one there. There's someone will replace them in name, but there's no one to replace that person in the line of the chain of command. And so, I mean, it's super hard because no recent grad or some of the folks that you would think that would want to build into these systems wants to live in Springfield. I mean, it's just how it is, right? So it's
true across all the IPA programs too. I mean, King DePage webinar a few weeks ago had somebody on from IEPA, and that was his whole song and dance was that, well, I hired one guy, but I actually need 20, and we'll never be able to process all these permits. And
I mean, I work with, from the monitoring side to the permitting side to the watershed side. I work in a lot of different hats with work groups, and it's good. And then now there's going to be money coming in. I just hope that they can get it out.
Yeah, right. You got to wonder.
Did I see that there's some new helpful guidance coming with those funds around pushing the revolving program funds more towards non-point and watershed approaches?
No, I have not seen any of that yet. No, those programs, they have done 60% of the funds are going to be directed for environmental justice and disadvantaged communities that fit that description for those programs. But everything that I have seen for non-point source is coming through the other programs, like through some of the NOAA stuff with their climate grant programs from the Corps through their 206 and things like that. But the SR, and then, you know, SRF has also gotten a ton of money for lead and copper. So there's two pots of SRF has gotten that. The money I'm talking about is just for water improvements, but the lead and copper stuff is even billions of dollars that's coming out through that. So, but I have sat through American Rivers and them and the Land Trust Association on conservation. The conservation side of things is still, besides for the in-stream practices like that get done through the ecological restoration stuff, like through 206 and stuff, are sort of parts of other programs. Like NOAA has like a climate program where you may be able to do some green infrastructure and things like that. There's not flat money yet for it, but they also came out originally said that it was all shovel ready, and now they're backtracking saying, no, we'll pay for feasibility studies because who's ready?
Yeah, right.
I mean, a lot of
Nobody-
people have money, have these projects ready to go. If they, you know, I'm ready to go. I got 3 projects. I'm ready to go. So give me some money. I'll build them. So some things are changing. Maybe we'll see more, but right now I have not seen anything. I don't know if you have, Eliot, but I've sat through lots of webinars. I've read parts of the bill. I've been through, the president just released a guide to the bill that breaks down each segment and where the monies are and what granting programs they're going through. I can share that link if you guys haven't
Yeah,
seen
and
that.
I just got a copy of that guide too. And so we can share that.
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
I sent it to, I sent it over to Tim. I know that, but yeah.
Lynn and I are on Congresswoman Underwood's Science, Technology, and Environment Advisory Council. And we're trying to get information from them on this, you know, because it's, like you say, it's lots of money and it's all going to go through state agencies, but figuring it out exactly how it's going to go through there and who's got the staff to actually deal with it, and how we as local groups can somehow be involved in that, being sure that, you know, green infrastructure is being considered throughout all the infrastructure stuff.
Mhm.
And we haven't been able to find much information to get us there.
Yeah, I have a couple webinars, Jeff, I can send you that I've watched through some of these organizations that are posted that you can just, that you can stream. So
Yeah, okay.
if anyone's interested.
Got a thumbs
Sorry, I
up. from
derailed the
Holly.
conversation from like local legislative initiatives to national ones.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, any other questions, comments from the peanut gallery?
Since we've got 1 minute, one other local thing we're working on. I know the watershed includes parts of Lake County, and last year we passed legislation. You know, the Toll Highway Authority sort of pulled the plug on the Route 53 extension a couple years ago, and the legislators from Lake County last year enabled a new task force to look at alternative uses, including a greenway and open space. And so that task force has met a couple of times, and I just think there'll be more public opportunities coming this year for what we think is a really exciting opportunity for potential linear connections there. You know, IDOT had gotten most of the north-south properties purchased for the road. Happens to be a lot of high-quality property and INAI sites. So that may be a really exciting vision that becomes more fleshed out later this year.
Good to know. Fun fact, I did a lot of the wetland delineations on the 53 corridor probably about 25 years ago.
Is that right? That's about how old that EIS is, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Way back.
Yeah.
All right, any others?
I think Kate Green wanted to share something.
Yeah, I have a brief announcement if that's okay.
Right, sure.
Resource Environmental Solutions is working with SUFRAC, the Southeast Wisconsin Fox River Commission, on some grant applications. The one we're looking at right now is through NRCS, their Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And so we're pulling together a grant application for that. We're going to be focusing kind of in the upper watershed and looking at projects for wetland restoration, stream bank stabilization, and possibly some on the farm ag practices as well. And I think we've got a time slot in the afternoon for the Fox River Summit. So more information to come, but if anybody's interested in more information or wants to chat about what that proposal is going to look like and what's going to be included, just wanted to put it out there, and I can throw my contact, my email in the chat for anybody to reach out.
All right, thanks, Kate. Indeed, it is on the program, I believe, in the afternoon at the summit. All right, well, thank you, Eliot and Jack. Always very informative, and I'm sure people will think of more questions later. We have recorded this session, so Becky will put a link to it on our FREP webpage. And we'll probably post some of the other links that we talked about just to make it easier for people to find it all in one place, foxriverecosystem.org. And then, yeah, I encourage you all to attend, or actually there'll be a kind of a live streaming option for the Fox River Summit. So if you're not comfortable traveling up to Burlington, Wisconsin for in-person for whatever reason, we're going to try to make it available by live stream. I'm not exactly sure the details of that, but you should be able to log in and at least hear what's going on a live stream for that. And that's on Thursday, March 17th. And then our One Earth Film Festival will be on March 12th at 6:30. That's all virtual. Get the information off our webpage. The links to register for that. If you register, the registration for One Earth Film is technically free, but they ask for a donation of, I think it's $8, and then they'll send you the link for viewing the film screening. And you know, it was interesting. Last year went all virtual, and so we were the only group hosting our particular film, but we had people logged into it from all over the country, which obviously isn't possible when you're in person. So it kind of added a different element to it. And so we look forward to that again. What's the name of our film, Becky? I can't remember. Inhabitants something.
I'm working on the website just now. Inhabitants, the full title is An Indigenous Perspective. And there's even a longer title too. I just looked on their website. So it's really a beautiful film about different practices that Indigenous people have practiced for centuries and are trying to re-establish, and we should all listen to them. So, and see how they do. So it's really going to be a beautiful film. And Jessica's working with a member of the Soaring group. Now I gotta get the full name of that, but to represent in the post discussion and having a Native American be in on that discussion that is local. So some of you are familiar with Soaring. It's SOARRING, and they've participated in a number of environmental activities. Some of you have probably been involved in over the years in the Chicago area. So it should be a great film to watch.
All right, so with that as our final plug, thank you all for attending, and we'll post everything to our website as soon as we can. Thanks all.
Thanks. Be well, everyone.